Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started here. Well, welcome to the Milken Institute. Again, I'm Skip Reimer, Executive Director of Programs and Communications for the Institute. Before I introduce our speaker, just a couple of items. Number one, our next forum will be Monday, November 15th, when Zachary Karabell, who is a Milken Institute Fellow, and Aaron Kramer, who is Head of Business for Social Responsibility, will be here to discuss their new book, Sustainable Excellence, The Future of Business in a Fast-Changing World. That's Monday the 15th. Again, there's no charge, but we do ask you to register in advance. Just go to our website, milkeninstitute.org. And we also have two associates breakfasts next month. These are events for our Milken Institute associates only. On Wednesday, the 17th, David Bonderman, who is co-founder of TPG, one of the largest private equity firms in the world, will join us. And the very following day, we have back-to-backs. Ba Swan Jen, who is Managing Director of the Singapore Economic Development Board, will be here. So if you would like to become an associate, we'd love to have you. The person to see here today is Katie O'Reilly in the back of the room. Katie, say wave. She'll be happy to tell you all about it. Finally, if you'd like to buy a copy of today's speaker's book, right over here, there you go. And after today's program, the author will stick around and sign copies of your book. Well, I'm delighted to introduce Paul Sullivan today. Paul is a well-known journalist who, many of you know, writes the Wealth Matters column in the New York Times. Before that, he was a reporter, editor, and columnist for the Financial Times, and his articles have appeared in the Herald Tribune, Barron's, Boston Globe, and many other prominent publications. Clutch, Why Some People Excel Under Pressure and Others Don't, is his first book. And if you've read any of the reviews, I think it's fair to say that Paul did, in fact, perform well under pressure. Now, some of us might have our own idea of who's most clutch. I know for those of you old enough and who grew up in Los Angeles, my favorite star, of course, was Mr. Clutch, Jerry West, of the Los Angeles Lakers. But Paul goes much beyond, in addition to sports, he goes into clutch players in business, in the world of theater, and even the military. It's a wonderful book looking at how do you succeed when things get stressful. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Paul Sullivan.
Thank you, Skip. Listening to that introduction made me a little nervous. I hope I don't choke up here. I'm clutching my bottle of water. I am, yeah. Thank you for coming out today. I appreciate it. I'm going to start with a little bit of a quiz. Make sure everybody's paying attention. So I promise not to stand up here and read, because there's nothing I hate more than to be sitting where you're sitting and stare at the top of some guy's head for an hour. But I'm just going to read 3 quick stories in here, and I'm going to ask you which one of these stories is clutch. They're all sporting events, and there's only one right answer. So this isn't, you can pick one. There's only one right answer. So first one. In Game 7 of the 1965 Eastern Conference Basketball Championship, the score stood at 110-109. The Boston Celtics led the Philadelphia 76ers by 1 point with 5 seconds left on the clock. The 76ers had been given possession of the ball and were ready to inbound it. Whichever player got it had time for one shot to win or lose the game. As Hal Greer, the 76ers all-star guard, threw the ball into play, Johnny Havlicek spun and tipped it to his Celtics teammate. Havlicek steals it, boomed Johnny Most, the gravelly voice announcer of the Celtics. Havlicek stole the ball. It's all over. It's all over. Johnny Havlicek stole the ball. Arguably the most famous call in basketball, it has immortalized the play. What it leaves out is that Havlicek had his back to Greer and spun at just the right moment to tip the ball. This makes what he did even more extraordinary. He wasn't even looking at Greer, but his quick move sent the Celtics to victory. So that's number one. Okay? Number two, a local story here. 2 decades later, Tommy Lasorda, the Los Angeles Dodgers manager, decided to put Kirk Gibson in as a pinch hitter. Down 4-3 in the first game of the 1988 World Series with 2 outs and the tying run at first base, Gibson would have been the ideal choice in the circumstance had he not had a stomach bug and 2 legs in such pain that he limped to the plate. If he hit a pitch anywhere in the ballpark, he wouldn't have made it to first. He could only do one thing, hit a home run. Gibson, in that shape, looked like an easy out, even more so because he was facing Dennis Eckersley, the Oakland Athletics star pitcher and future Hall of Famer. But Gibson worked the count until it stood at 3 balls and 2 strikes. On the next pitch, he swung, all arms and no legs, and hit the ball out of the park to win the game. His hobbling around the bases, fists raised in triumph, remains a quintessential image of fortitude, determination, and toughness. Okay, so Greer's 1. That's number 2. Fast forward another 20 years, and Eli Manning, the New York Giants quarterback, was facing a situation he had faced many times in his career, getting close to victory in an important game, only to lose in the end. Tom Brady, considered one of the best quarterbacks of his era, had just brought the New England Patriots back from 3 points down to 4 points ahead in the last 8 minutes of the Super Bowl. He had passed, handed off, scrambled, everything he could think of to get the Patriots into scoring position. When he threw to Randy Moss in the end zone, it seemed that Brady, with his nerves of steel, had engineered another come-from-behind victory. The score stood at 14-10 with 2 minutes left on the clock. Manning had led his wildcard team to the Super Bowl, but now it looked as though it was over. He had nothing to be ashamed of. It had been a great run, but it didn't play out that way. The highest stakes of his career, win and beat a team that was expecting to go undefeated, lose and forever be overshadowed by his brother Peyton, who had won the Super Bowl the year before, Manning refused to quit. He led his team down the field until he threw a short pass to Plaxico Burress in the end zone. The final score was 17-14, with the Giants as the Super Bowl champions. So that's number 3. So how many people think number 1? Okay. How many think number 2? All right, local crowd, good. How about number 3? All right, that's pretty good. Well, it's not number 1. And I hate to tell you, it's not number 2 either. It's number 3. And the reason it's number 3 is because clutch is not luck. Clutch is the ability to do what you can do under normal circumstances, under pressure. And however romantic it is, Havlicek steals the ball, Gibson, fist raised, going around the bases, they involve an element of luck. Hitting a home run like that, it's wonderful. We love to see the replay, but it's not a repeatable thing. The case with Manning is that what he did was strategically move the ball down the field. That is something that he had been doing all season. He had taken that team and got them there, and then under the most pressure of his career, he kept them going. And that's for most of us, what we think of when we think of clutch. We think of a sporting moment. I wanted to write this book because I came to realize that being clutch was not only so much more, but so much more important than just sports. Now, back in 2007, 2008, as Skip said, I'm a business journalist for the Times, and I start to look around and see otherwise smart, capable, successful people at the top of their industries, at the top of their game, failing under pressure. And I simply wanted to know why. And so the Wall Street Journal said that my process was, my favorite quote, it said, Sullivan sallied forth with pen and notebook in hand. You laugh, but this is an enlightened group, I know. Some of my friends aren't so enlightened, and they've, of course, made fun of me for the word sallied. Now, naturally, I wish they had said something like, Sullivan charges intrepidly forth. But I'm also equally happy that they didn't say, Sullivan stumbled and wheezed to the finish line. But the point being is how I came to write this book was by talking to people, by going out and finding people who I thought were either great performers or incredibly intelligent, and I asked them questions. Now, some of you may be thinking, okay, how does this apply to me? And so I'll ask you some questions. Anybody in here work in finance? Okay. Anybody work in the entertainment industry? Yeah. Good. Any parents? Okay. Those are all pressure situations. All of us have to perform. I'm a new parent. I'm under pressure all the time now, it seems. But we all have to learn to perform under those situations. So in talking to the people I talked to, I found from them that there are 5 key traits of anybody who's good under pressure. It doesn't matter if you're a baseball player, doesn't matter if you're an attorney, doesn't mean if you work in the entertainment industry or if you're a parent. Those 5 traits are focus, discipline, adaptability, being present, and what I call the push and pull of fear and desire. Equally, people who aren't very good under pressure, people who choke, demonstrate 3 traits as well. They don't take responsibility, they're overconfident, and they overthink their role in their organization, in the world, in society. So I don't have time to go through all of them, but I'd like to start with focus, because focus is the most important. It's the foundation for all clutch performances. Now, I think we all think that we know what focus means, but I'd argue that we often confuse concentration with focus. They're 2 very different things. Concentration is one of these lights up here. Focus is a laser beam. Concentration is driving your car at home at night. Focus is driving a Ferrari at 200 miles an hour on a racetrack, and it belongs to your boss. Now, most of us know what a courtroom looks like. We've seen them on television. Maybe we've been in them. There's a judge up here, 2 attorneys, maybe there's a jury. We also know that in a courtroom, you either win or you lose. It's a high-pressure situation. Go a step further and say we may have some attorneys in the room. If not, I'm sure all of you know attorneys. And most of these attorneys, I'll bet, are very specialized. It's rare that they're even as broad as a tax attorney. They're instead a trust and estates attorney. They're always very specialized. Well, when you get to the biggest, most important cases in the country, there's only a handful of lawyers who ever get the call. One of them is a fellow named David Boies. Some of you may know David, but for those of you who don't, he's slightly smaller than I am, very thin, wears a blue Brooks Brothers suit off the rack, pretty plain shirt, plain tie, hair's a little scruffy on top. He's got thick glasses that he pulls on and off for emphasis. David Boies looks like your 5th grade social studies teacher. He doesn't look like a super attorney, which is what he is. But if you look at his cases over the past 3 decades, he's been involved in some of the most important trials in American legal history. Westmoreland versus CBS, U.S. versus Microsoft, Bush v. Gore, AIG versus Seco, trial last summer. Right now here in Los Angeles, well, he did Prop 8 a couple months ago, but right now, the key case for all of you Angelinos, the McCourt divorce case, absolutely. These are all high-profile cases. There's a lot of pressure at stake. There's also a lot of money at stake. He owns a vineyard in California. He cycles in France 2 weeks every year. He has a beautiful home in Armonk, New York. He's been wildly successful at this. But if you think about those cases I just named, they don't have anything in common. Westmoreland was a libel case. U.S. versus Microsoft was antitrust. Bush v. Gore, county commissioner's race on steroids. AIG Seco was a lawsuit. Prop 9, civil rights. More courts, divorce. Nothing in common. So I asked David, I said, how do you do it? What is it? And he says to me, I create, sorry? Well, of course. But he says he creates a morality play. His ability to focus is done through morality play. And I said, David, I don't know what that means. He said, think of it this way. In the United States versus Microsoft, the reason that the full weight of the federal judiciary was coming down on Microsoft was because the company was taking its browser and bundling in with its operating system. Basic antitrust. You didn't have a choice. You got it whether you wanted it or not. And he said, I knew with that information that I never was going to concentrate on browser technology. And I said, David, you're an attorney. I'm not, but that would seem to be the whole reason that you're representing the United States. He said, yes, but if I concentrated on browser technology, it would just take one programmer to come in and say, look, Judge, the reason it's like that is because it just works better. This is late 90s, complicated stuff. Chances are the judge is going to say, you know what? I don't want to mess with this. I don't understand it. Let it go. Instead, what Boies did is he focused on creating a morality play about credibility. Credibility is something we can all understand. Now, I said, okay, walk me through it. He said, well, when we brought Bill Gates in for his deposition, we started to pick away at minor points. And if you see this deposition, go home tonight. It's on YouTube. It's a YouTube classic. Starts off, there's Gates in the box, and sitting down. He's shades of brown. He's got a dark suit on, a tan shirt, a brown tie. He looks like a nerd, a rich nerd, but a nerd. He's got his can of Coke in front of him, and he's this arrogant, very arrogant look in his eyes. And Boies, one of his first questions is, Mr. Gates, you have this Microsoft dictionary here. It defines all these terms, technology terms. Can you tell us what killer app means? Gates says, well, I don't know. Isn't your name on here? Yeah, it is, but I don't know. I mean, it is what it is. It's whatever. Read it to me. What does it say in there? Reads it to him, fine. Next day, he does the classic, Mr. Gates, in this email, you said the following things. Yep. In this presentation, though, you said something completely different. How do you reconcile the two? Okay, so I don't know. It doesn't matter. I mean, the email is the email, and the presentation is the presentation. That's just what it is. By day 6, Gates is in his chair, rocking back and forth like Rain Man, and he can't even look. He can't even look at Boies. At that point, that's when Boies starts to hammer it home. That's when Boies has shown that he's eroded all the credibility of Gates. And as he said, at the end of the day, Bill Gates knows more than David Boies about technology. But if the judge can't believe a word he says, it doesn't matter. And that, for all of us really, but for Boies, that was the key. That's been the key to every trial he's ever litigated, is to focus on that morality play. For the rest of us, focus is the key thing when we come under pressure. Because what's our goal? If we concentrate on the small details, if we get bogged down in the details, under pressure we're going to fail. Because we're going to start thinking about all those things instead of the goal is X. How do I get to X? Now, discipline is the second trait. It's probably the most axiomatic of them all. It's essentially a battle against yourself. But the third trait is one of my favorites, adaptability. Now, how would you get out of here right now? If you had to get out the back door, what would you do?
Would I have to get out in a hurry? Or would I just amble out?
You have to get out somewhere in between. How would you walk out of here?
I would get up. I would consider the aisles. What's the closest to my objective?
Yeah. So you probably either go around this way or go around that way.
Yes.
Fair enough. And if there are no chairs here, what would you do? You'd probably just stand up and walk straight out, wouldn't you? Because that's quicker, right? That's a very simple example of adaptability. We adapt every day. The problem is add in a pile of pressure, and few of us adapt as quickly. The reason is we often fall in love with our plan. Another California story, tell you the Secret Service. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but the Secret Service, they exist to plan everything out. That's their goal. Their goal is to make sure nothing ever happens. Well, in late 1991, a Secret Service agent in New York named Chris Falkenberg was sitting at his desk and he got a call. And he said, look, we've got this governor, this southern governor. He's not doing so well. And one of the guys on the detail, his wife just had a baby. Can you go cover for him? Well, Falkenberg jumps at it. He's been doing the other job of the Secret Service, which is to ensure that nobody counterfeits a US dollar. Very important, but pretty boring. So he gets on the detail of this southern governor, and well, as the year goes on, it bleeds into 92, turns out this guy is building some momentum. As you might guess, this southern governor is Bill Clinton. So he goes from having relatively small crowds to enormous crowds. 1992, after winning the primary here in California, Clinton is giving a talk at USC. Well, Falkenberg and the rest of the agents on the detail go out and they scope everything out, they put up rope lines, they get everything planned, they screen everybody as the Secret Service does, they get ready because they don't want anything to happen. That's what they do. Well, that day Falkenberg was number one. The Secret Service model exists so that everybody has a number. Number one is always next to the protectee, 2 and 3 behind, 4, 5, and 6, and they go like that. The reason is that a Secret Service agent can be brought in from any part of the country, any part of the world, and protect somebody immediately. And he shows up, he says, I'm number 5, he knows what to do. Well, that day, everything was going fine. Clinton was being Clinton. He was shaking hands, he was kissing babies, he was pressing the flesh as he does. But Clinton being Clinton, he didn't want to stop there. He hadn't shaken enough hands, so he veers off. He gets out of the rope line and starts getting into the crowd over here. This in and of itself is not a problem because they know Clinton and they know, well, chances are he's going to do something like this. So they go off and they adapt. They adapt their plan. They start to guard him in a different way. Then something bad happens. Falkenberg hears Clinton say to him, this guy won't let go of my hand. And Falkenberg tells me, he says, there's no way that's the only thing I heard. There are thousands of people there. I mean, USC is going crazy. Because the only thing I heard was this guy won't let go of my hand. Well, in an instant, he's grabbed the guy's thumb, ripped it back, shattering his arm, dropping him to the ground. 2 and 3 come behind, push all of them into the SUV. 4, 5, and 6 land on the guy. 7, 8, and 9 fan out into the crowd to see if he has any accomplices. I hear this story for the first time, and the only thing I can think to ask Chris Falkenberg is, what happened to the guy? And he looks at me as if I'd asked him the stupidest question in the world. And he says, I don't know, and I don't care. Not my job, exactly. And his job was to adapt in that moment. 2 and 3 had their job, 4, 5, and 6 had their job. This is the Secret Service. It protects presidents. It protects other dignitaries. It has to work that way. You might say, okay, of course they adapt. But if you think about it, think about how much time, how many weeks, how many months went into that initial plan to securing USC, to getting everything just so. This was a labor. And instead, what do? In a second, they scrap that plan and they move on. Most of us can't do that. Most companies can't do that. As I say, if you have any doubt, I have 2 words for you. Cadillac, Cimarron. You know it. You know it. Probably the worst American car ever built. It was a Chevy Cavalier with leather seats, 3 times the price. Nobody bought it. People were embarrassed to drive it. My best friend's father had it. My best friend said, Dad, can't you get a real Cadillac? He's like, I love this car. But GM didn't learn and Cadillac didn't learn. And what happened? Well, we know what happened. We now own part of General Motors. They didn't adapt. They let their ego get in their way. They were too proud. They thought they had always been the greatest car maker in the world. Why would they ever not be the greatest car maker in the world? Now, I said at the beginning that I wanted to take the concept of clutch away from sports, but somebody here told me that there's still baseball being played, which I'm a New York Yankees fan, so usually when they stop playing, I think that's usually the end of the season to me. But most of us, with the Kirk Gibson example, most of us think of a quintessential clutch moment being late inning in a game, team down by a couple runs, they need to come back, like Kirk Gibson. Well, just such an incident happened in 2008 at the American League Championship Series. Tampa Bay Rays were up 2 runs over the Boston Red Sox. J.D. Drew comes up, a Kirk Gibson-like hitter. Well, they want to change the pitcher. The manager for Tampa Bay puts a call in to the bullpen, and he says, send in the rookie. Send in the rookie. Who would send in the rookie? But he sends in the rookie. The rookie comes trotting in. The rookie happens to be a fellow named David Price. David's about 6'3", long drink of water, big ears. When he puts his hat on, they go down here like this, and he looks like a Little League player. Well, he comes in. He gets Drew out. Next inning, he comes back, gets 3 more outs. Tampa Bay goes to the World Series. The Red Sox go home. When I talked to him, what I wanted to know was, what were you thinking? What was your first thought when you went in there? And this surprised me because his first thought was, I could give up a home run. And I said, David, I don't really believe in the power of positive thinking, but I know the positive-negative thinking, the power of negative thinking can't really help you. And he said, well, it was neither. It was the power of realistic thinking. And he said, it's very possible that I could have given up a home run. I knew that. What I did then, once I accepted that, is I went through my routine and I warmed up as I always would. I had faith in my 95-mile-an-hour fastball and my hard slider. Well, the point here is David Price realized that, just probably as Dennis Eckersley in the earlier example did, the only thing he could control was his process. You can't always control the outcome, but he could control his process under pressure. But what he also did was he didn't overthink the situation. He didn't think, if I get these batters out, my team is going to the World Series, I'm going to get glory. Nor did he say to himself, well, if I fail, they're going to lose. They're going to lose and go home. It's going to be all my fault. He just thought, this is what I do, and I do it at a high level, and that's important. And that's people who think in those terms are often insulated from choking, which is a good thing. Now, all the examples I've given you so far have been fairly positive examples because I'm in California and it's sunny outside and I feel good. But the reality is, being clutch is hard work, and that skill can be lost. A couple years ago, before I sold the book, I was trying really hard to get an interview with Tiger Woods. And I did. And I sat down, flew down to Asheville, North Carolina. It took me about a month and a half to arrange the interview, but I got my 14 minutes with him. And I asked him all different questions, and I asked him, the key question for the book was, Tiger, why are you so good under the pressure of tournament golf? And he said, well, he thought about it for a while, and then he said, I've been there more often than anybody else. I know what it's like on Sunday. I know how to play. And I laughed. I think, well, it's not the best reason I've ever heard, but it's pretty good. And I'm a journalist. I know that if you get a little bit of a quote, you can spin something all around it. And this is, the fall of 2008. He just won the U.S. Open on the broken leg. I thought, this is pretty good. So I skipped out of there like a 15-year-old boy, called my agent, and I said, I got the Tiger story. He says, great. We got Tiger. We'll put Tiger in the front of the book, this and that. Well, 3 days before I turned my book in last year, right after Thanksgiving, I was relaxing with my wife, feeling pretty proud of myself, and I got an email across my BlackBerry that says, Tiger Woods in an accident. I tell my wife, the first thing my wife says is, "Good God, you're not dedicating the book to me." And the reason she says this is at that point, 2 people I'd interviewed had already died. So she thought, Tiger's number 3. I, being, let's be honest here, somewhat opportunistic, thought, I hope he didn't die. But if he did, I got one of the last interviews with him. I mean, I can ride that for years. Well, as we know, Tiger didn't die. And when you look at the book, you'll also see Tiger is no longer the first chapter. I'm also a very pragmatic person, and I thought, who's going to buy a book with Tiger in the beginning? But the real reason is I started to think more about Tiger. He's now the last chapter. It's not punishment. Don't worry. He's okay with it. And I started to think about what I had to do to get to him, what I had to do to have that 14-minute interview with him in Asheville, North Carolina. I had to have 2 completely useless conversations with his childhood best friend. His childhood best friend was running Tiger Woods Design, also was booking plane flights for Tiger's other friends. And while he was a very nice guy, he had absolutely no qualifications to do what he was doing. No other design firm would have hired him. Then I had to have 2 slightly less useless, but still not terribly informative conversations with his agent at IMG. His agent at IMG, perfectly nice guy, but has become very wealthy, very well known, and very successful in the golf business because of Tiger Woods. Then, when I was sitting there in the room for my 14-minute interview with Tiger Woods, I had to withstand the withering stares of his head of PR. His head of PR is a fellow named Glenn Greenspan, who, before working for Tiger, ran public relations for Augusta National during the Martha Burke time. For those of you who don't know golf, Martha Burke led this campaign to try to force Augusta to let women in. Well, when you're Augusta National, you can say no. You can say no, and your members are still going to show up to play. The professionals are still going to come to play in the Masters. And quite frankly, they only have 3 sponsors. So 3 companies will give you money to put the tournament on. You can say no and get away with it. The problem, though, when you're doing PR for Tiger Woods, a global brand, you can't do that. You can't say no. And the more I thought about Tiger, the more I saw what I call the Tiger Conundrum, how he could be so incredibly clutch in this one area of his life, golf, something he had done since age 2. But in this other area, he was no better than the Dick Folds of Lehman or the Ken Lewises of Bank of America. He did all the things that somebody should never do under pressure. With his little group that was insulating him, what did he do? He didn't take responsibility for his actions until 3 months later. He grew overconfident. He thought, this will blow over. Everything else will blow over. I've always gotten a free pass from the golf media. And he overthought his importance to both his sport and to the rest of us. He realized that nobody's going to give him a free pass. He was a classic choker. And that, while may seem somewhat disheartening to some people, I find it incredibly heartening because it shows that just because you're great in one area of your life doesn't mean you're going to be great in the other, and vice versa. Back to me being a positive guy, I just want to tell you one last story, and then I'll take some questions. And that, I want to end on a positive note, because some of you may be out there thinking, okay, well, I'm pretty good, under the pressure of my job. I'm pretty good at the pressure of being a parent, but can I get good at these other areas? Well, a guy named Tony Alvarez, some of you may know him. He's one half of a firm called Alvarez and Marcel. They're a restructuring company. When something goes horribly wrong, when a CEO chokes, Alvarez and Marcel gets called in. They're unwinding Lehman Brothers right now. They brought Health South back from the brink. Tony Alvarez personally saved Twinkies and Wonder Bread for all of us. He's a professional clutch artist. He knows how to deal with pressure. But there was one area of his life where he struggled. He had a passion for bowling. And Tony is a small guy, and I like him a lot, and I call him Elfin, but I don't mean that disparagingly. He's small. And his partner, Brian Marcel, is this giant former University of Michigan football player. So bowling was Tony's sport. It suited him. He got very good at it. Well, about 4 years ago, he realized he had bowled 11 strikes in a row. For those of you who don't know bowling, one more strike, he rolls a perfect game. Well, everybody else in the bowling alley also realized he had rolled 11 strikes in a row. All the other lights go down, everybody starts bowling, and the entire bowling alley is looking at Tony Alvarez. Tony Alvarez looks around and sees, oh my God, everybody is looking at me. And he gets up there for his 12th strike and does exactly what you'd imagine him doing. He rolls it and watches it as it nicks one pin and bounces into the gutter. Well, his wife was with him that night, and as a good wife, she patted him on the back and said, Tony, you rolled 11 strikes. That's pretty good. Better luck next time. Well, as it turned out, because he was so passionate about bowling, he got the opportunity 6 months later to bowl a perfect game. Same situation. 11 strikes, lights dim, everybody looks at him. This time, he's a little better prepared. He knows that that's going to happen, so he says, okay, I'm not going to pay attention to the people looking at me. I'm just going to think of my mechanics. Because all day today, just back and through. That's all I'm going to do. And so he gets up there, and that's all he thinks about. He thinks of his mechanics. He goes back and through. And this time, 5 pins. Well, he's pretty crestfallen, and he tells me that about 2 years later, he gets yet a third opportunity. Everything all the same, but this time, he's a little angry. I won't repeat what he told me, but he's not as thrilled as you'd imagine him being. But he says, all right, I'm not going to look at these people. Forget my mechanics. Today, every time I rolled a strike, I just looked at that dot on the lane, and I rolled the ball over it. That's all I did. And that's what I'm going to do now. And so he looked at the dot, rolled the ball, and watched as it went, as it rolled, boom. All 10 pins fall. Perfect game. That's clutch. That's the ability to do what you can do under normal circumstances. Roll a strike under pressure. Roll that last strike for a perfect game. Just to end, I want to say these stories that I've shared have been with people who are extraordinary. They're extraordinary in their fields. But I picked them for a reason, because they seem like they're up here, like what they're doing is in the realm of the gods. But if you go through each one, they were never preordained to be clutch. David Boies didn't learn to read until the 3rd grade, and he got kicked out of his first law school. Chris Falkenberg disappointed his mother. He's a skinny little guy, grew up in Scarsdale. She wanted him to be a doctor. He became a Secret Service agent. David Price, who this past summer started the All-Star game, almost quit baseball. He went to his coach at Vanderbilt and said, Coach, I don't think I'm very good under pressure. And the coach said, David, what else are you going to do? He says, I'm going to go home to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and work at McDonald's with my brother. His coach said, David, I don't think that's your future. And they worked together on his mechanics. He got better under pressure. Even Tiger Woods wasn't always great as a kid. As he said, he lost more than he won. Tony Alvarez, I told you his failures. The point here is that all of these people learned to be clutch. And I would argue that in my book, all of you who read it can learn to be better under pressure. You may not become David Boies, but you can get better at the pressure of your day-to-day lives. So, thank you very much, and I'd love to take a few questions.
Thank you, Paul, very much.
I got some hands.
You're going to have mics on both sides.
Yeah, we get some folks over here.
Anybody over here?
Maybe start in the back and work your way forward.
Hi, my name is Cyrus Hekmat. I have a question regarding the concept of nature versus nurture. How many of these athletes, or what percentage of them, went through peak performance training? Whether it's, I think, the concept of flow, which Csikszentmihalyi. How many went through this mental training?
Yeah, I mean, all of the people I interviewed, one of the things that surprised me early on is that they don't think in those terms. They don't think in terms of flow. They don't think in terms of this being a pressure situation, this being something different. They work. I mean, they're grinders. They're all. That's the one trait they all have. They're all grinders. They're all digging it out every single day, so that becomes the normal. They're doing that normally, and then the pressure is just there. But they're so focused on doing well on a day-to-day basis. And I think one thing that comes to mind, to go back to David Price, is his coach at Vanderbilt, Tim Corbin. He starts every season by lecturing the kids on what he calls the marshmallow, jelly bean, and rock theory of pressure. And what he does is he gets a burner, holds it over the marshmallow, burns up immediately. Does the same thing with the jelly bean, withstands it a bit more, but eventually it melts too. And then, of course, when he gets to the rock, that's the only one that gets better under pressure. And he illustrates this with the kids, because if you're playing at Vanderbilt, if you're playing at an SEC school, you were great in high school. You weren't just good, you were great. And you get there thinking, I'm great, but of course everyone can't be great. And he uses that to start working with these kids. And what he does in practice is, I don't know, how many of you, any sense how long it takes to feel the ball? If I'm a batter and I hit a ball to the shortstop, and then the shortstop throws it to first base, any sense how long that would take you? It takes 4. It takes 4 seconds. But most of these kids, when they first get there in practice, they take 6 seconds to do it. And the point, he makes them do it in 4 seconds in practice. Why? Because think of any activity in your life in which if you had to do it a third faster under pressure, you probably wouldn't do it very well. So he gets them. It's not the concept of flow. It's a concept of not overthinking what they're doing, but also just that practice and those mechanics and instilling them early on, so that the pressure of the game is just, it's no different to them really than what they're doing in practice, because they're used to doing it in 4 seconds. So. Well, they do. I mean, I spoke up at West Point a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to the tennis team has a mental coach. And I think a lot of people, maybe not a lot, but I mean, some people think of a mental coach as somebody who's going to really just get you thinking positively or get you thinking about success. And this mental coach is not like that. It's much higher. He tries to keep them focused on that moment. So it's not, I think the sort of what I would call like the 1990s version, or a lot of these books like The Zone or Flow or all this. It's much more practical. And so with the coach, the mental coach for the West Point tennis team, he gets the kids to focus on the strings of their racket before a crucial point. Why? Well, it doesn't matter. They could focus on anything. They could focus on the floor, but it's the one thing that will always be consistent is their racket. And the reason he does that is because the fourth trait I talk about in my book about being clutch is being present. And what that means is not thinking either of future success or past failure, just thinking about what you need to do then. So in looking at the racket like that, he gets the kids thinking, okay, I'm going to serve the ball, I'm going to be ready. So in that sense, a lot of them do, but.
Having written the book and done the interviews, how has it changed your life or your approach to things?
It's a good question. I say early on in the book that one of the things that, as I said up here, in 2007, 2008, I saw these people failing under pressure, but it brought back not painful but troubling memories of my childhood in which I played a lot of golf. And on paper, I was very good. I had a low single-digit handicap. I'd go out, play with my grandfather, play with my friends, and I'd shoot somewhere in the 70s. And then I'd go and play in a tournament, and I wouldn't even break 80. I'd shoot, maybe I wouldn't even break 90 some days. And it frustrated the heck out of me. And it continued into my adult life when I'd get invited to somebody's fancy country club, and I think, I better play well. I'm not going to get invited back to this fancy country club again. Well, invariably, I didn't. I choked. And in writing this book, it's helped me a lot in that I no longer, I can stand up here and unequivocally say I no longer choke when I'm playing golf. My handicap is now about an 11. I blame that on my 1-year-old daughter. But I play to an 11 wherever I play, one side or the other. I could have a good day or I can have a bad day. We all have those, but I don't choke.
What about in real life where it really matters when you're in meetings?
All right, golfers out there, please explain to her that golf is more important than real life. Oh my God. Well, Greg Norman, come on. To answer that quickly, I mean, to tell you an even more personal story, when I sold this book, my wife wasn't pregnant. We had no plans. We wanted to have a child, but we didn't know what would happen. And 2 months before I turned the book in, our daughter was born. And so I laughed. I thought, this is like some 1960s Latin American novel. I'm writing the book and living it at the same time, because I realized that to get everything done, I had to focus. I had to be disciplined. I most certainly had to adapt, because it wasn't going to go as smoothly. I wasn't going to have the uninterrupted hours of writing that I had before. And so in that sense, I think about this all the time, how much it's helped me, and particularly the adaptability part. So, I did write the book, so I've spent a lot more time with the subject than somebody who reads it. But I believe firmly, that I'm selling something up here that's legitimate, and that it's it's not easy, it's very difficult, or else we'd all be great under pressure. But it's something that's attainable. I think you're going to get a microphone here.
Oh.
Sorry.
Regarding creativity and for people who are writers, everybody has a different style, or artists, or people who do creative work. How does this clutch relate to that?
Well, in one sense, somebody just sent me a great quote the other day that I'd never seen from Hermann Hesse, who said that something like discipline, I'm going to mangle it, but it was something along the lines of discipline is far more difficult to achieve than talent. And so the argument is that you could be the most talented person in the world, but if you don't have that discipline to stick through, it's not going to work. And one of the chapters I talk about this actor named Larry Clark. If you don't know his name, you'd recognize him if you saw him on TV. He was on Law & Order for a long time. And I tell the story of how he gets this theater role of a lifetime in a David Rabe play, has this crucial role. But in learning his backstory and talking to him many, many times, he told me that there was this one moment when he was always talented. He went off to college, he got his actor's equity card at 18 and started working from there, and was always able to support himself. But he got a bit lazy, and he got a bit too smug. He thought, I am so incredibly talented, of course this will happen. Well, he was in his mid-20s living in New York, bussing tables, and all these great roles that he thought he would get just weren't coming through. And he says, I went for this audition for a Las Vegas review of some sort, and it paid $5,000 a week. At the time, he was bussing tables, maybe making $200 a week. He hadn't sung with a piano in years, and he just sauntered in there thinking, I'm Larry Clark, I'm wildly talented, I'm going to get this. And he failed miserably, failed horribly. And that was his wake-up call. And that's when he really started to, apply himself and to be more disciplined. And now, I see him all the time. He's a great actor. How do we go over here? Yeah.
You talked about fear and desire.
Mm-hmm.
Is it getting over your fear so that you can sort of get to your heart's desire? Or what
No, I talk about it. Thank you for the question. I talk about it in the sense of an entrepreneur, and that every entrepreneur thinks that whatever their idea is necessary, and that it will be wildly successful, or otherwise they wouldn't do it. Otherwise they'd just get a job like everybody else and work. And so they have this incredible desire for it to succeed. But if there's not that fear to govern it, I've found through my research that often they fail. Angelo Mazzilli was in the news last week. He's a great example of that, someone who rose incredibly high, but he didn't have that governor on him. And I talk, one of the examples I give in the book is about Bernie Marcus, who's one of the co-founders of Home Depot. And in the late 70s, he had been working for a hardware company here in California called Handy Dan. And he was fired, but he wasn't just fired. He was dismissed with cause, and there were allegations that he'd stolen money, and he'd done all these improper things with the union, none of which proved to be true. It was all false. But at that point, he was unemployable. And so that's when, he'd had this idea for the Home Depot, and he started it, but he never wanted to forget even when it got wildly successful, he never wanted to forget, how much had initially been at stake. And so he named his management strategy "Running Scared." So it always brought that back. So, yes. Yeah.
Oh, thank you for a very elucidative presentation. If we accept the premise that environment and heredity are two great collaborators, where do you think a basketball star like Kobe Bryant fits in?
So funny. I gave this talk to a group of people from Los Angeles not too long ago, and they all asked me about Kobe Bryant. They said, "Why isn't Kobe Bryant in your book? Where does it fit in?" So I was waiting for my Kobe Bryant question. Kobe is a great example because many of you may know this, but one of the things he is wildly talented. He's the star, probably the star, maybe not. I mean, he and LeBron are the stars of their day, and they're two very different players if you think about it. LeBron hasn't been as successful. He's been a bit flashy. He does all this ritual and all this crap he does. But if you think of Kobe, there's one of my favorite stories about him is whenever somebody new joins the Lakers, he plays them one-on-one, and he beats them. And he plays them hard, and he runs all his guys through that. Well, that may seem like, well, he's a jerk or he's bullying these people, but I see it in a different way. He's always staying sharp. He's always keeping those skills, honed so that, he can learn something from these new guys. He's always open. It's the example of people who are lifelong learners. I mean, he's always there, testing himself. And so that's why I think, he'll go down as more than just a star of his day. He's up there with the Birds and the Jordans of the world. So, sir, yeah? Or
Oh, we're going to go over here.
Hi, you mentioned
sorry.
with choking that a lot of
you,
times...
you threw me off there. I was like,
Sorry.
He's standing and the voice is over here.
With choking, that a lot of the times it's associated with an arrogance, but can you talk a little bit about insecurity, the flip side?
Well, I mean, that's a good question, and I don't talk about it so much in the book, and one of the reasons is that I think the problem, if somebody is insecure, I don't know, I mean, it makes me very sad, but I don't know if they'd be able to perform their job or whatever the task is at a very high level under normal conditions. I think they would be second-guessing themselves. And so to be, that's why the flip side of choking isn't necessarily being clutch. The flip side could be just being bad at your job. And so, I mean, you don't, if you cure one, you don't get the other. So I think you have to, as one of the, Jeff Ogilvy, a golfer who won the U.S. Open in 2006, I talked to him and he said, you can't be overconfident. You can't be wildly overconfident, but you have to have self-belief. And, without that basic level of self-belief, I don't think you can get to that baseline where you can perform at a high level and then hope to perform well under pressure. Sir, this gentleman here, he's been trying. Oh, no, this guy here he's been trying for a while, and we'll get to everybody.
All right. Thank you very much. I didn't know what the clutch was until you told me.
Well, thanks for coming anyway.
You have a very nice smile, so if I add one more word, clutch is the ability to smile just like you do over there, under heavy pressure. Thank you.
Okay,
anyway,
thank you.
My question is, all the president, if I may have 30 seconds, the president, among all the President Kennedy had a clutch to do the right thing in Cuban crisis. He could have bombed Cuba and then Russia bombed East Berlin.
Yeah.
If he shoots the Russian warship, then Russia will send a nuclear missile,
Right.
and then could be a whole World War III,
Yeah.
But he stood his ground, and he had a clutch, made the right decision under pressure. And he once said, we need a man who can dream of things that never were. I think that's one of the clutch. My question to you is, I respect, there's 8 U.S. presidents after President Kennedy. Among 8, whom do you think had a crutch and made the right decision under pressure? Can you name one or two? Or
I think my mom told me never talk about politics or religion in a group you don't know very well. So I may punt on that. I actually, I'm not going to answer your question, and I'm just going to say I'm not going to answer, so I'm not being evasive. But I talk, exactly. It's not even a good pivot. I'm just not going to. But I do talk about politicians briefly in the beginning of the book, and I make the argument that most of them are only ever really good under the pressure of a campaign, and that's not. I don't say that cynically. I say that because that's a moment in which they can do something very individual. They can focus. They can have the discipline. They can adapt, and that's how you get somebody like a Christine O'Donnell in Delaware beating the established Republican candidate. Why? Because she just drilled away at him, and he thought, I'm not going to lose to this person. She can't even pay her mortgage. How am I going to lose to her? And he did. And so, but the problem is, Kennedy's an excellent example, but for most politicians, I think once they get in office, they may have great ideas, and they may have been great under the pressure of the campaign, but at least today, they're so buffeted by different forces, by different advisors, by competing interests. And being clutch is really an individual thing. It's really a personal thing. So I think it becomes very hard for them to be great to be clutch, at least. I think they can be good or bad at their job, but as I define clutch, I think it's very difficult. You started, yeah.
You just concluded with a comment suggesting that clutch is an individual thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you did make a reference earlier to an institution which did not behave in a clutch fashion.
GM?
Yeah. Would you reflect a little bit on how these concepts apply to institutions?
Well,
and also to deliberative ones. In other words, institutions such as legislative bodies, for example.
Uh-huh.
Are there governments or legislative bodies that can behave in this fashion?
Yeah. The way I talk about GM in the book is it's another California example. I didn't know I had all these California examples, but I talk about the NUMMI plant up in Fremont, and I talked to the guy who was the key sort of linchpin between Toyota and General Motors and putting all this together. And as we talked, you're right, an institution, it can't be clutch, but an institution is a group of people. And so I talked about, the decision makers at GM as, it's a long line of people, from the early 80s on to Rick Wagner, who kept thinking, well, GM has always been successful, it always will be successful, I can't really screw it up. And that's kind of the argument I make as to why it is up to the individuals, it is up to those leaders. So. More?
Hi, my name is William Rickles. I'm a psychiatrist. Anyway, I have some ideas that I wanted to test with you. One of the things that we often see is when people over-practice, they're able to work and operate under difficult situations.
When they over-practice, you said?
When they over-practice. Yeah. Not over-practice in a negative sense. They practice a lot and a lot and a lot and a lot, and it gets there. I think I'm just talking about another aspect of one of the things you've said. But also, I've observed that sometimes when people have nothing to lose under incredible pressure situations, they do very well. I wish I could remember the names of it, but a few years ago in figure skating, there were 3 women who were very high level competing for the gold in the Olympics. All 3 of them, under pressure, didn't do well, and then there was a 4th girl who had nothing to lose, and she went out and skated the session of her life.
Right.
You see that over and over in a number of situations. I would think maybe the rookie pitcher that you talked about really had nothing to lose. He would either be wonderful or he was a rookie.
Yeah.
What do you expect from him?
Sure.
But the thing I wanted to suggest is that there may be a biological aspect to your concept for you to consider.
You're a psychologist or a psychiatrist?
I'm an MD psychiatrist.
Yeah. Then better than I do, in psychiatry, one of the hotter fields right now is resilience and looking into, what Charles Morgan is doing up at Yale. There's a whole, there are some people, Charles Morgan is this Yale psychiatrist who's done really fascinating research on Navy SEALs, and he's had all this access to test their saliva in these extreme moments, and he's found that some of them are just biologically predisposed to be amazing under pressure, but it's a small group of them. So there is that component. Well, but I would argue that the other part of your question, you were actually talking about the same thing, about people, you call it over-practice or practicing a lot, and then the whole idea of somebody who has nothing to lose. But
those are different concepts.
No, I don't think they are, because the person, the example you gave with those three people, those three skaters in the Olympics, they're all wildly talented. If
Right.
they weren't, they wouldn't have been there.
Mhm.
So if I had come in and won the gold, that would have been, I had nothing to lose. Sullivan doesn't even know how to ice skate.
Well-
Those people, and there is a lot to, the concept, and I talk about it in the last chapter of the book, of deliberate practice, meaning that, anybody here who plays tennis, I don't want to keep talking about golf, we don't like golf, but tennis, you'll talk to people and they'll say, I've been, working on my serve, I got my serve down perfect in practice, but I play in a game and, it's just not the same. And I'll say, well, how do you practice your serve? He said, I get out there, I got a bucket of balls, and I hit, 100 serves in a row, and they're all great. And I'll say, well, that's your problem. I mean, unless you serve the ball 170 miles an hour, you're going to have to hit some other shots. And I talk about it in the book how the best way for people to practice, I talk about golfers, but is not to go and buy the bucket of 100 golf balls and, hit 40 with your driver, 40 with your 7-iron, and 20 with a couple other clubs. It's to buy the bucket of 35 golf balls and hit, one shot with your driver, one shot with your 7-iron, one shot with your 3-wood. Why? Because that's how you play. Same thing with tennis. I wouldn't, once you know how to serve the ball, you need to work everything together. You need to work on the serve. You also need to work on your forehand.
To learn it in context.
Yeah.
But the thing I wanted to suggest that was somewhat different, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I run into a number of people who are underachievers, who are very smart, can't get through college, but they get into a job that is perfect for them. Like a lot of contractors I know are really smart guys, but they couldn't make it through college.
Yeah.
And they do wonderful as contractors. I've known a policeman who is...
Well, I'm sorry, I know there are a lot of other
But
questions. So what's your question?
My observation is that ADD has a lot to do with being able to function under pressure. The thing of it is that the way we treat ADD is we give people stimulants.
Right.
In a pressure situation, you get a natural stimulant of norepinephrine.
Yeah.
And I've seen a number of people like policemen, people who are good in combat. Under pressure, they're wonderfully focused,
Right.
and they perform beautifully. Without pressure, they're not so great.
Right, okay. Good. Thank you. Over here, I guess? I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you. You said you were at West Point, and that made me think about the Army or various industries or groups. Is there one particular group or a few groups where you're going to find, such as in the military, people who thrive under clutch as a group?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and I get it often. And my answer is always, who are the people that you've seen who are the best equipped to thrive under pressure? And the answer is, Special Forces soldiers. And I talk about it in the 3rd chapter of the book. But then I always pull back because I don't think that's a realistic goal to think, when I interviewed a lot of guys at West Point, I interviewed a lot of, Marines, Force Recon Marines, which is the equivalent of Navy SEALs. They're incredibly well trained to be great under pressure, and they are, because they're operating in the nexus of life and death. But, it's kind of like when people ask me, name your, top 5 clutch moments in sports. I hate that question too, because I hate to do it, because I don't want, my goal in the book is to show people that they can get better under the pressure of their own lives. And, people, Special Forces are at the top. I'd say, surgeons are a close second. But my argument is that these principles apply broadly, so I think anybody can get better whatever that pressure is, even if it's, whatever it may be. So.
Time for just 2 more questions. Anybody here in the front?
I was thinking, back to the corporate thing, I was thinking of Steve Jobs, and I'm kind of amazed at how he's able to do what he's been doing consistently. And, I think about General Motors. Structurally, they had a board of directors that numbered in the 30s, and whoever was going to be at the helm could not do anything. But, it's just an unworkable type thing. So it was decades that GM couldn't do it. But I noticed that Steve Jobs, for whatever reason, is able to stay at the forefront in an area where you have South Korea, you have all these well-financed companies that could be competing, and somehow he's able to still maintain that lead.
Yeah.
And to me, I get the sense that's a very clutch kind of thing. And
yeah, I mean, I think there's been particularly that he's been sick, there's been a lot of pressure in his life. But I think on many levels, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I would say on many levels, I think he's just incredibly good at his job. And we have to account for that too. And you know, Apple is, you know, I have all kinds of Apple products in my life. But in terms of, you know, personal computing market share, it's still.
Doesn't an attitude and an energy come with it? You know, I think of the go-to guy like you're talking about Jerry West.
Yeah.
Or Dollar Bill Bradley. It's like, give me the ball.
Yeah, I mean, this is what Larry Bird used. Larry Bird did the same thing. And yeah, some people, you know, they want it, but they only get it because they performed, you know, on such a high level. The two people that you mentioned, it's not like, again, it's if, you know, the 10th guy off the bench is saying, give me the ball, and does it. I mean, these guys have, you know, Jordan was the same way. I mean, they've gotten that way through, none of them, you know, they may have that swagger now. I mean, Reggie Jackson was great for swagger, but they've put in, they're grinders. They put in all the work to get to that point. So they may have that attitude, but you know, I'd argue that they weren't born with it, and it took a lot of work.
Time for one more over here.
Well, or I'll talk to you after, or oh, yeah.
You have Shaquille O'Neal who's practiced over and over and over and over again in foul line. To me, the most important thing is what you said is being present. You can practice and practice,
Yeah.
but if that presence is not there.
Yep. No, I agree with you because yeah.
Over here, last question.
Right here. Oh,
sorry. I looked right in the lights. I was like, and I froze like a possum.
You talk a lot about athletic achievement and physical clutchness. And then you also talk a lot about how you want sort of the regular person to be able to improve their daily lives and be clutch under pressure. How do you sort of draw those parallels? Because so much of being an athlete and doing things physical, after all that repetition, it almost becomes innate, and you don't. You know, they always say about using instinct as an athlete and not always necessarily thinking about doing it. Like, you know, Kobe Bryant taking the last shot at the end of the game. He's so conditioned physically to do all that he doesn't have to think about it. He just does it.
Right.
So how does that stuff translate into sort of people living their daily lives in the corporate world or in their, you know, lives as parents and things like that?
So your question is how, even though I've used these examples of well-known people, how do average people learn to apply it?
Right. Well, you talk very much about the repetition and about how these people, how athletes can be clutch.
Yeah.
But how, you know, I guess the only example that I really thought of was with David Boies as an attorney. You know, or did you get more examples of that type of being clutch and how that can translate into the average person who obviously, you know, none of the people in this room I would imagine are not pro athletes, or, you know, we're all professionals and trying to live our lives and make them better at some point.
Yeah. I mean, the majority of the book is about that. I mean, different, you know, entrepreneurs, different business people. I mean, the last two chapters are, you know, very practical. It's how to be clutch with your money and how to be clutch in sports, but meaning, you know, hobbies. And I kind of, after telling all these stories, you know, the first part of the book looks at people who excel, the second part, people who've choked, and the third is this very practical part. And so that's, I mean, I use these stories because I think it's interesting to hear stories about these people when I'm standing up here. But it could be, I mean, it's basically these principles, and I do break it down in the book, saying that, you know, whatever it is you do for a living, you know, you're good at it on a day-to-day basis. Well, I talk, you know, Jamie Dimon, for example, head of J.P. Morgan Chase. I spent a couple hours with Jamie, and talking to him, you know, he wasn't always the head of J.P. Morgan Chase. You know, at age 30, he was made the CFO of Commercial Credit, which is a small firm in Baltimore that became one of the building blocks for Citigroup. But at the time, it wasn't anything. And he said, you know, so many other 30-year-old CFOs might have let that go to their head. And I said, well, I'm a 30-year-old CFO. I'm making a lot of money. I'm doing great. But for him, it was always that sense of responsibility, always that sense of how to do the job. And he tells me that one day, you know, none of the past CFOs have ever gone through, you know, line by line, the budget of the firm, and he does, because he says, I can't be the CFO if I don't know what is going on. And he sees this one line, and it says $7,000 for watering flowers. And so he calls the guy in who's responsible for it, and he says, you know, look here, $7,000 watering all these flowers on the executive floor. And the guy looks at him and says, you know, there are a lot of flowers here, boss. I mean, they're everywhere. And Jamie takes him outside, and he says, feel this? It's plastic. And so it's a throwaway story, but it shows that level of paying attention to detail when he was way down here, so that when he got way up here, when he was buying Bear Stearns, when he was buying Washington Mutual, he had learned it all through his life. He applied it all through his life. So that's how he was able to do it under probably the greatest pressure of his career in 2008.
Paul, I apologize. We're going into overtime. I'm going to allow one more question from this
One more question.
over here.
Hi.
Oh, sorry.
It's just a quick question. So Jamie Dimon is a fantastic example, I think, of someone who had maybe an I can type of mindset. So I'm curious, and I love the idea of your book. How does mindset, how do your beliefs, how does the story that you tell yourself affect your ability to perform under pressure and consistently perform under pressure? My guess, if you were interviewing Tiger Woods, he probably has more of an I can mindset. So where does that sort of factor in someone's ability to step into their next level and perform under pressure?
Right. So just so I understand, so meaning like the story that you tell yourself, like this is who I am and this is the job I'm doing?
Yeah, well, I think it's maybe on a bunch of different levels, but we all have some sort of mindset of what we think we can do and what's possible.
Yeah. So
someone like Tiger Woods, my guess would be, well, it's probably a bad example now, but Jamie Dimon is a very interesting example, and he actually went through many, he actually turned down a job and took different type of jobs, sort of went outside his comfort zone to do a lot of things. So I think he has maybe an I can mindset. A lot of people have the mindset that I can't or they don't know. So I would think there's some sort of correlation between what you believe, what you tell yourself, and where you think you can go, i.e. Kobe Bryant or any of these other, probably seen more in athletes, but I would think also CEOs, depending, have different
I said that before about,
traits.
yeah, it's a good question. I said before about, the need, not to have, crazy overconfidence, but to have, a level of self-belief as something that sort of gets you there. But in terms of, most of these people who were the truly great ones under pressure, their mentality is not so much I can do whatever. It's I am doing this right now. And I think that's a subtle distinction, but it's an important distinction. You see a lot of people flame out because, you need to have a vision, but my book is very practical, and I say that in a positive way. It's not, and that's what makes a lot of these characteristics, I believe, attainable, and that you can kind of see how these people, these people who, when I tell the story, when I frame each chapter, they do seem like gods. But then as you break it down, you see how they got there. And it's very much, as I said earlier, they're grinders. It's one thing after another. And when you think, there are lots of guys, not to keep coming back to golf, but lots of guys in the PGA Tour who think they can win. And they all can. They're wildly talented. If you exclude, Tiger in his prime, the difference between the number 2 guy and the 125th guy on the tour in scoring average is less than 2 strokes. So in that span, they're that good. But it's all little things. This fellow I talked to in the book, Matt Goggin, you'd watch him play. He was at the time 47 in the world or something. And you'd say, why hasn't this guy won any tournaments? Well, by PGA standards, he's a crappy putter. He takes 1 stroke more per tournament than the average. And that hurts you over time. And so he does have that belief, I can do this. But his coach is very practical and says, you can, but you're not going to be able to until you get the mechanics sorted out down here. So it's those two working in conjunction. So.
Thank you very much. Paul Sullivan, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to buy his book, it's right over here, and he'll sign books if you just get it. The line's already started there.
I turned it off.
I'll go over there. I'll fall on you. I am too, yeah. Oh, did you ever hear of a man named Billy Mills? All right, Billy won.
Okay.
Michelle knows. I was just saying, because I was going to
Let's make that long.